I feel the U.S. national team owes us a couple hours of sleep back. Am I right? I mean, I had it pretty good because I was on the West Coast. But I was getting back from a game doing Leagues Cup, so I hadn't slept a lot. So I really wanted to go to bed at 9 or 10. This isn't about me. I wanted to go to bed around 9 or 10, but I stayed up. I know many of you on the East Coast were up at 3 a.m. to watch this splendor of a game. Woo! I mean, how weird was that, right? I mean, we just don't expect that from the U.S. women's national team. And it was off across the board. The top tier talent wasn't good enough. The depth wasn't good enough. The coaching wasn't good enough. The intensity wasn't good enough. Everything was lacking. Everything. I mean, was there a redeeming quality? Carly Lloyd. And by the way, I want to say this, and I'm just putting it out there because for the women's game to grow, we've got to be able to take the criticism. And I'm happy to see a flow of criticism. I saw Carly Lloyd getting criticized because she said the most valuable player on the women's team was the post, which denied Portugal from going through and knocking the U.S. out. That's the kind of analysis you get on the men's side all the time. And I'm glad to see the gloves are off. Because no, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. This is the World Cup. If you don't perform, especially your favorite, you get ripped. And that's the best thing for that women's team because they have not been engaged. I saw, and the minute I saw it, I knew this was going to come back to bite them. Megan Rapinoe and Crystal Dunn and several players come out. They did like a makeshift model shoot. And I'm like, what are you doing? This is not the time for this. You have not looked good in the World Cup. You beat Vietnam 3-0, and the Dutch just scored, 15 goals on them. And then not convincing against the Dutch. I mean, the alarm bells should have been ringing, and they're certainly ringing now. But I see that, and I'm like, no, that's not what's supposed to happen here. And if it was the men, if I saw the men do that, I would rip them a new one. And I'm glad to see the gloves are off on the women's game because the reality is we get a little bit tender and they gave it the best effort. It's not how it works. It's the World Cup. If they choke, they choke. If they underperform, let them have it. Especially if you're the two-time defending champion. But this was bad. And look, when you're watching this game, this is always the trap. You're watching the opponent and you're gaining respect for them going, man, Portugal, they deserve it. They have played their heart out. They won every 50-50 ball. The officiating wasn't great in this game, and Portugal used it to their advantage. And when you see you're not getting calls, the U.S. has to adjust. They didn't adjust. We'll talk about all of that here tonight or today on the Soccer OG. Check out the Soccer OG podcast where all podcasts are available. We'll have a new one coming out with Stephen Warnock to preview the Premier League. We have a great one on there where we spoke to Jake Ziven about calling Messi games. And Liam Weeks, who is in the United Arab Emirates, we talked about everything about Saudi football. So if you've had any questions about Saudi football, we will answer them. It was a very enlightening one for me, who, as the OG, I should know everything, but I'm still learning things. I think you'll enjoy it too. Like and subscribe us here. I got no notes. I'm going to kind of just rip through here and give you my observations of what we saw. But at the end of the day, the United States are moving into the round of 16. They'll play Sunday, 5 a.m. Eastern, 2 a.m. I believe Sweden's the opponent, who are looking very good. They're going to be a big underdog because there's no way you feel the U.S., the way they look right now, are going to advance any further in this competition. And keep in mind, Rose Lavelle, who was one of the better players, but still well below her standard. She got a yellow card. She is suspended for that game. Unless something bizarre happens, the World Cup is going to end for the U.S. It should have ended. It should have ended against Portugal. Can you imagine that conversation? I think it's unfair to put the burden on the U.S. to win 3 straight World Cups. No one's done it before because it's very difficult. It's impossible. And I was reluctant to say they were going to win it. I think I did to some people. I picked Spain, which isn't looking great either. So don't come to me for picks for the men or women's World Cup. Don't come to me. Don't come to me. So I think it would have been unfair to say they could win it. And that's a lot of pressure, and I get it. But I don't think anything was prepared for what we have seen unfold consistently. And Vlatko Andonovski deserves a lot of the blame, a lot of it, because he hasn't had the courage to make big-time decisions with players like Alex Morgan, who have who shouldn't be there. I'll be frank, who should not be there. Alex Morgan, look, the next generation's not ready. We're in a weird spot. So it happens at every World Cup where you're hoping for the best. You watch it come out, you're like, it's not happening. It happens. Great teams on the men's and women's side through the beginning of these tournaments it's not been there. So Vlatko Andonovski, I think the biggest criticism for him is not using the bench. But maybe we're not that deep because we thought that would be in our advantage. And I see Portugal empty their bench, and we've made one sub. And we didn't go to the bench against the Dutch either, which means Vlatko isn't confident on the bench. We can scream and scream about bringing in Lynn Williams and Trinity Rodman, but clearly Vlatko's not 100% convinced that they can do it. And they haven't, but nobody's done it. The one substitution he made against Portugal is, around the hour mark, it was Megan Rapinoe for Sophia Smith. And I know Sophia Smith wasn't playing well, but I don't want her out of the game, especially for Megan Rapinoe, who, if you've watched this tournament, I said Alex Morgan shouldn't be there. Megan Rapinoe has no business. I don't want to take a shot at Megan Rapinoe. She has been an amazing servant. She is a World Cup champion 2 times over. She has been self-made. You look at the World Cup, when they go to commercial, the one player that is on all the commercials, Alex Morgan has them too, but it's Megan Rapinoe. She has this animated one that goes on forever. And all of that's a distraction to me. I know the women's team is not watching that. But if it's a player that shouldn't really be there, and look, she should not come into another game. If it's 1 more game at the World Cup, if it's 2 or if it's 4 more games, Megan Rapinoe should not come into another game. I'm not trying to diminish her at all. I'm just saying it is stunning how the talent goes. That's what happens when you get old. 38-year-old athletes should not be at a World Cup. I see Megan Rapinoe, and I'm not, look, I could rip everybody here. And I've kind of ripped them here to some degree. But to have a pop off your bench with Megan Rapinoe, it's turnover. No defensive presence. Kind of just sits there on an island. Shots on target. There was one decent play. And when I see her come out with the fashion show, because I know that was probably her idea. Her intentions were good. You need to take those personalities out so that group can grow on their own. It is just like Uruguay on the men's side, which I said when the men's World Cup. When you have this young group of players that want to express themselves, and you have Cavani and Luis Suarez there kind of feeling, they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be there. You've got to let this roster, young players, grow on their own. And I will be irate if Megan Rapinoe plays anymore. It's not her fault. If someone selects her for the World Cup, then she should go. So it's completely on Vlatko Andonovski's fault. So we have questions about substitution patterns. We have questions about the roster build. Julie Ertz should be in midfield. There's just a lack of fire on a lot of those things. So everything that Vlatko has done can be brought into question. So that is the big one, right? Because that's the coach. And I know people are comparing and saying that Greg Berhalter did not have the issues here. He did not have an intensity issue. He did not have a team firing off. He didn't have an issue with the team maybe not on the same page. There was a brotherhood there that I'm not seeing about this team. It just hasn't fit. Maybe they're not ready for it. We also want to talk about the rest of the world catching up. This has been an incredible World Cup for that. And the round of 16 is going to be so good because we've seen... Nigeria beat Australia, and I think, did they win the group? I believe so. Nigeria was amazing. The big upset, Colombia beating Germany. These are Mount Rushmore results at the Women's World Cup that you would never have dreamt happening. Portugal almost upsetting the United States, which would have been the biggest upset in the history of this competition. And it was like kind of nonchalant. We're like, while it's happening, I mean, I was listening to the Fox coverage and they were going, this isn't a must win. And I'm like, what? It is. You want to win the group. They had no chance of winning the group because the goal differential was blown out of proportion by the Dutch. But you don't want to put yourself in this perilous position where you could lose and are saved by a post at the end of the game. That is nerve-wracking. And that kind of mentality and not come out to win is going to undermine this U.S. team at some point. But they're through to the round of 16. And I hope that they press the buttons and they go, okay, we have new life. Start from scratch. Vlatko's got to lead that and say, all right, I'm sorry your World Cup is done. Your World Cup is done. We're going this. You're not starting. Make seismic decisions which are required here. And stand by them. Because one thing we've also seen with coaches in the World Cup, it is a courage problem. They don't want to upset the stars. I've seen it from coaches time and time again. Sometimes you just got to be there. That's why I just did a backflip when Portugal benched Cristiano Ronaldo at the last World Cup. You talk about stones. That's what it's all about. Those are the decisions that have to be made. It didn't really help Portugal in the big picture of things, but those are the decisions that have to be made. You've got to talk to Alex Morgan. You've got to talk to Megan Rapinoe and say your roles are going to be diminished. Got to be a big boy here, Vlatko. You got to be. And we'll see. But again, the young players, Crystal Dunn to me was maybe the worst player on the field. I couldn't believe the amount of times she's turned the ball over. I couldn't believe the 50-50 lost balls. And, you know, there's a saving grace defensively. They have been sound. Naomi Girma was very good. I would say that. Alyssa Nair, I feel confident with her in goal. I mean, there was a couple moments where you have to hold your breath, but I think it wasn't her fault that ball hit the post. She came off the line and helped force it wide. That ball was going to hit the frame at some point, and it did. So defensively, they have something there. But offensively, they've lacked scoring goals. They should have scored 5 or 6 against Vietnam. They should have scored 2 or 3 against the Dutch. Should have scored 2 or 3 against Portugal. And now instead, they have 4 goals in 3 games, which is truly stunning for a team that scores goals in bushels. So a lot of work to be done. I still have faith. And the World Cup can work in mysterious ways. I know the talent is there. It's mental. They've got to kind of break through a couple barriers there. Sophia Smith, in particular, who is our best player, who was being dispossessed. I couldn't believe it. It was all an intensity thing. It was all a situation that Portugal wanted more, and they were not ready. And that's why I saw that fashion show, and I'm like, you better be ready for this game. If you're doing that, you better be ready for this game. And they weren't. And it was the worst performance by a women's team at a World Cup for as long as I can remember. I think you can all agree. I mean, again, the criticism has been strong, and it has to be. You can't coddle them. You gotta let them know what's at stake. Because even though they've won 2 World Cups in a row, there is a standard excellence. And once you let go of that, you sometimes don't get it back. And the rest of the world is looking like they are ready to seize that opportunity. Whether it's Brazil or Australia or the Swedes or Portugal perhaps, or Japan, who is lurking down there, and they have been so clinical. They look like the U.S. used to look, right? Japan came ready. They weren't a favorite coming in, but they came ready. And that's what's made this tournament so compelling. And I hope you stay tuned in even when the U.S. get knocked out. And I'm saying that matter-of-factly because I do believe, I don't think this is tenable, quite frankly. So we shall see. But this was hugely disappointment. There's a lot to take away. Again, I do not want to see Megan Rapinoe on the field again. She's there for training. This was such a mistake to bring her. I cannot emphasize that enough. I've said this, and it's not about the women. I've said this about the men's game. When you bring the old guard back, you complicate things, and the young guard cannot express themselves because they have to kiss the ring. They got to kiss the ring. And you see that with the players. And I've seen it just undermine so many World Cup campaigns. And the U.S. were pretty good because they cut the cord. They had some injuries, which got some of the old guard like Becky Sauerbrunn not there. And obviously, Christian Press is not really the old guard, but they got injured, that they had to go to the young route. But then go all in with the young route. You have to have these big-time conversations. You want to see that. But I don't know what else I could criticize. I think that's it. The bench, I don't think it's going to be used more. I just don't want to see one sub and a 38-year-old midfielder past her prime as the one that we come in here as our option. We hope, and we have a few days for the U.S. to recharge the batteries, hit the buttons to get back on track. They can certainly beat Sweden. They can beat anybody in this World Cup, and their defense will keep them in games. And the Dutch are a favorite right now, and look, they played poorly against the Dutch, and they walked away with a 1-1 tie, which would be good enough to help you advance here and at least force penalties. And you got a good goalkeeper. The Soccer OG, check out the Soccer OG podcast where all podcasts are available. We'll be back here with more Women's World Cup. We'll talk a little Leagues Cup. We'll talk a little Messi. It's been an exciting summer. And it's not even a World Cup or Euro year. What do you think about that?